And Jesus said to the disciples, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find." So they cast, and now we're not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. That song we just sang from Jeremiah talked about the way that the Lord would like us to be like a fruitful tree, like a tree planted by water, where our life is rich and the impact of our lives on others is a blessing to them. Think how different that is from the experience of the disciples fishing all night and catching nothing. They had been trying to do something useful, and it wasn't working. Although they were skilled fishermen, they hadn't caught anything. They had fished all night with all their experience and abilities with nothing to show for their efforts. Then the Lord called to them as an unrecognized person on the distant shore and suggested that they fish off the other side of the boat. What must this have sounded like to his disciples? What does it sound like to us? Part of our mind is inclined to see this as an arbitrary and inconsequential matter. Would the fish really be all that different on the right side of the boat? The disciples involved in this story were experienced fishermen who had been fishing all night. They had thrown their nets in over and over again in any place that seemed like a good spot to catch fish. Why would Jesus' advice suddenly lead to a different result? We are often like these disciples. They appear to represent people who have some knowledge of what is true and good. This knowledge can either be small or great. When first learned, however, it is inevitable that it is truth misunderstood. Teachings for the new church say that in reality, our first understanding of truth is not really truth itself, and consequently, when we follow it according to our best understanding, we do not do what is genuinely good. When we have this first understanding of truth, it tends to open our eyes to see the errors, confusion, and misunderstanding of others. It's easy for us to think that it would be useful for us to correct these problems. But as we begin to try to do this, we discover this may not be as easy as we may have hoped. People don't automatically accept our suggestion with grateful thanks and immediately correct the problem we pointed out. As we reflect on this state of affairs, we can end up shaking our head at the perversity of such people, their apparent determined ignorance, or their lack of understanding. We perhaps unconsciously attribute ill will or at least wrong values to the person who doesn't seem to be accepting the help and direction that we're offering. The person seems determined to self-destructive ideas and harmful behavior, and he or she seems resolute in this position. For example, we might observe a coworker's approach to a job and see that he seems to be consumed with the small parts of it and is forgetting the big picture. We can try to get the coworker to see the bigger perspective, but that person might respond that what he or she is focusing on is important, and it sounds like we're asking them to ignore these important things. As we try to deal with friends, aging parents, or a spouse, we can find some of them too demanding on themselves and others too apathetic and compliant. We can see the consequences of their attitudes, words, and actions that hurt themselves and others, and we can want to help. But when we point out the errors, faults, and problems, As we try to suggest that there's a better way, in response, we may get denial, arguments, resentment, even apparent agreement, but no change in opinion or behavior. We're trying to help, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere. Like the disciples, throughout the night, throwing out their net, hoping for a catch of fish, and getting nothing. What is the problem? Why don't people change as readily as we might wish they would? Aren't we supposed to help? We can even be sure that the Lord wants the person to grow in this area. But sometimes the bigger problem is that we aren't using an approach that the Lord can cooperate with. Do you remember hearing an ancient fable about the wind and sun having a competition to see who could get a traveler to remove his cloak? The wind tried first. He tried to blow the cloak off the traveler by the force of his breath. The harder he tried, the more tightly the traveler clutched his cloak around himself. Finally, the wind gave up, and the sun took his turn. Instead of trying to force the man, the sun beamed down with a gentle warmth. As the traveler walked along, his grip on his cloak loosened, and finally, the man of his own free will decided to remove it. Sometimes we are too much like the wind in our effort to change others. The way the Lord has wired up our minds, most of us have a reaction when somebody says, "That's the wrong way to do it." The part of our mind goes, maybe you're the one that's wrong. It's very easy for us to start arguing with the other person, start coming up with more reasons why our way of approaching it is better than them. And it's partially because within this context of somebody saying, "That's wrong," there's a way in which maybe we're thinking, well, sometimes, but... So the question is, how can we get other people to change? We don't want to be like the wind, where we can try with all our might and get nowhere. This lack of results comes from an unproductive approach that is represented by the disciples fishing all night without catching any fish. The Lord comes to us in this state of mind, suggesting a different approach. Casting the net on the right side seems to represent three important things that are interrelated but somewhat distinct. Firstly, it means that as we work with others, that we're not supposed to emphasize what appears to them as abstract rights and wrongs, but instead, we are to help them recognize the consequences of their own behavior, and that better results would come from a different approach. In the family service, we sang a song based on teachings for the new church, where it talks about a girl having a bright garden in her heavenly home, but when she does what's wrong, the flowers fade. It isn't an adult saying, "You did the wrong thing." There's a consequence for her choices, and she can recognize it. Or the girl can have a beautiful dress, and yet when she does something inappropriate, that beautiful dress is covered with spots. A consequence that allows her to reflect, did that work well? Is this what I want? So, we can help other people try to see how true ideas lead to a better life. Rather than saying, "That's the wrong way to do it," we might say to them, "I found a different way works. Would you like me to show you?" Or any other way that perhaps has them receive the idea with a more open mind. The teachings for the new church refer to this idea as teaching the good things of charity, or a wise kindness versus focusing on the truths of faith separated from life. And this is part of what the recitation we said today from the Gospel of John implies. The Lord said, "If you abide in my words," that is, if we're trying to live what the Lord teaches, then we will truly understand what he is trying to teach. Then we'll know the truth, and that truth will make us free. The second thing that casting the net on the right side means is that the Lord calls us to live a life of wise kindness ourselves. We read in the teachings for the new church, the Lord said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat," namely that they should teach the good ways of living. That they would thus convert the Gentiles to the church means they're finding in such abundance that they were not able to draw the net for the multitude of fish. One of the very powerful ways that the Lord can teach and lead people in freedom is by helping them to observe the truth wisely lived out in our own lives. We can do the best we can to model what we've seen to be what the Lord wants us to do. The Lord said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." The third thing that casting the net on the right side seems to mean is that when we're trying to help others, the Lord wants us to be led by a spirit of charity. Teachings for the new church state, when good is the side on which people act or teach, they net countless items of truth, but not the reverse. Can we feel some patience and mercy for where the person is at present? Can we be tolerant of differences that aren't in crucial areas? Can we even rejoice in differences that can contribute to the overall welfare of this congregation or community? The teachings for the new church state, when good is the side on which people act or teach, they net countless items of truth, not the reverse. As we try to help people grow and change, the Lord calls us to do our part in a way that he can best work through. He calls us to emphasize what is good, to try to model the lives ourselves, and have a spirit of charity or deep kindness that keeps us from being harsh or dogmatic. There are many passages in the teachings for the new church that speak to our outlook on the differences that we see in the choices of another. As we look at these differences, we read, "If charity is considered the essential thing of the church, then each person would say, in whatsoever worship he might be, 'This is my brother. I see that he worships the Lord and is a good person.'" And when there's a real basis for trying to help someone else change their outlook on life, the teachings of the new church speak of them as being regarded as friends and are to be instructed and amended. We as individuals can try to fish on the right side of the boat. And also as a congregation, we can try to have the life of the church reflect the Lord's call. May our focus be on what good comes from following the truth the Lord has revealed. May we try to model this goodness in the life of this congregation. And may the spirit of charity direct us as we work together to fulfill the uses of the church. We know that we are not all the same. Each Sunday, Bernathen and people in the Bernathen community meet in a number of different services. Those attending each service are choosing it for reasons that they think are important. May we try to grow from each other's perspectives on what's important in worship for each of us, tolerating, even rejoicing in differences, although the needs and wants of others may sometimes infringe on our own preferences or what we've seen to be true and useful. Let us dedicate ourselves to fishing on the right side of the boat in all that we do as a congregation. But also those who come in new and recognize the wonderful life that arises from the new church will be particularly inspired by this. Our efforts will also bless us as well. Instead of the frustration of being ineffective in what we do, like fishing all night with nothing to show for it, the Lord will work a miracle before our eyes, filling us with a sense of gratitude as we follow the Lord to a bountiful catch of blessings. Amen.